horrific attack caused not just tragic deaths and injuries, a tragedy for everyone involved. It was also a tragedy for the nation. The targets were not just innocent people, but the heart of our democracy. This is the ultimate prize for our enemies, stopping the country from working and threatening the values we so greatly prize. In the past, our panic and desire to find a quick and easy narrative has led us to react to attacks in a way that have caused us as many problems as they have solved. We've responded by demonising whole communities and enacting policies and laws that undermine our civil liberties. It's too soon to say how this was able to happen. That will come. But it's absolutely the right time to try to keep a clear head, look at the evidence as we get it, and act upon it. We need to protect our people, our landmarks, and infrastructure, as our emergency services did so bravely. But we also need to protect our values.
Yeah, I think I'd probably be in accord with a lot of what you just said. One thing that I wrote down as you were talking, Afua, that in the past we've enacted laws and policies that were retrograde. What were some of those?
So if you think about some of the counter-terror legislation after 9/11, for example, so pre-charge detention without evidence for 14 days, control orders for 22 hours a day, even the recent Counter-Terrorism and Security Act, which allows the government to use prerogative powers to withdraw passports, the new surveillance powers that are being used that have been described as the most extreme in the Western world. Now, when it comes to surveillance powers, we don't know enough about this to know whether that is relevant, would have been able to prevent attacks if this person, and he may have already been under the surveillance of the authorities. But the point I'm making is that we need to question. We need to question whether the legal regime, and I think actually the laws we've got now on the whole are much more reasonable and appropriately used. But in the past, I think we have overreacted. We've had to repeal a lot of that legislation, and it's affected many of us who are innocent and have no connection to terrorism in a way I personally think is unjustified.
We have some of the most restrictive surveillance in the whole of the Western world. Who's put that out there?
A number of people have said that. The civil liberties group, Liberty.
Well, okay, isn't that? I'm not saying that Liberty doesn't have a purpose.
They're not the only ones.
No, okay, but I mean that does rather colour or shade the comments, doesn't it, a little bit? Because you could file it under that. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? I mean, it's interesting. I think that the measures you pulled out, yes, there are a couple there that were a little bit too far. And I don't subscribe to the if you've got nothing to hide, why should you worry? I think that is absolutely wrong. You don't want an overarching state. But I do think that some of the trade-off we have to give, and we're talking when the inquiries are still going on, is that we will have to accept a greater degree of surveillance and intrusion in our lives. I think we have
We've already accepted it. So, now the authorities are allowed to listen to our phone calls, collect our email correspondence and hold it for up to a year. And in defence of that law, it's been happening for ages, and now it's just being made more transparent. So I don't disagree making it transparent.
Do you not think the world is changing, and it would be perverse in the extreme not to allow the authorities to do what they need to do, to listen in to our phone calls, to go to our emails, to go into our Instagrams and Facebooks, to do whatever they have to do? Because, a lot of libertarians find scrutiny an affront. I find the slaughter of innocents an affront. And I think whatever has to be done to stop that happening, we should be doing it. And for me, to lose the fact that my emails might be private, I don't actually care. If we don't know that it couldn't have stopped yesterday, we don't know that. But every time something happens where the authorities try to make us safer, they say by taking away some of our civil liberties, there's an outcry. We've got to stop that. You've got to realise the threat is out there. Let me just give you these stats again. Let's just run these stats by us again. 13 potential terror attacks have been disrupted since 2013. The threat level remains severe. More than 500 investigations into terror plots are running at any one time. And in the past year, the anti-terror police hotline received 22,000 calls from members of the public. That's twice as many as the year before. So the threat is there. And the thing is, we were saying before this was an isolated attack, but it's part of a pattern, and you cannot separate the two.
So what I would say to that, Carol, and I'll then bring others in, is that, first of all, I don't want this to be a discussion about whether we allow our intelligence service agencies to have the powers they need to stop attacks, because I'm pretty sure we all agree that we do. None of us want to live under the threat of constant attack. None of us want to see this happening on any of our streets. So that's a given. I'm saying we need to be questioning the powers that they have, and we need to avoid any knee-jerk reaction enacting new draconian policies, because what we've done in the past is make assumptions. We haven't looked at the actual evidence as to what is happening. When it comes to these kinds of attacks... attacks, when it comes to these kind of attacks, we've made lots of mistakes in the assumed profiles of the people who carry these out. For example, many of them are not people who are immigrants to this country. Many of them are people who are from this country. Many of them get radicalised very quickly. And what we've done, we've all been very abstract about this. In the past, we have enacted policies in a way that have actually demonised the entire Muslim community. Now, our contest strategy at the moment, which is the umbrella of policies around preventing and detecting terrorism, the principles, again, I'm sure we all agree with, but the way that some of them have been carried out have demonised communities. And I just want to bring in a clip from Mark Rowley, who brought this up in what he said last night.
Terrorists have a clear aim. That is to create discord, distrust and to create fear. The police stand with all communities in the UK and will take action against anybody who seeks to undermine society, especially where their crimes are motivated by hate. We must recognise now that our Muslim communities will feel anxious at this time, given the past behaviour of extreme right-wing groups, and we will continue to work with all community leaders over coming days.
June, you wanted to say something?
I completely agree with you, Afua, and I think also, at the end of the day, we also need to make sure that we protect our citizens from the state as well, because at the end of the day, it's fine when you've got a government in place that is actually ethical and is moral, but I, for one, would not want to be living in America right now with somebody like a Donald Trump with that kind of information. So at the same time, we also need to make sure, Carol, that we do, as Afua is saying, remain sensible about this stuff.
Rachel?
I think Mark Rowley spoke for me when he said that, you know, the aim of the terrorists is to create fear and to break Carol Malone, which they were very successful. Joe Cox's husband, Brendan, said that the attacker no more stood for the Muslim community than... Sorry, the attacker yesterday no more stood for the Muslim community than the man who killed his wife, Jo, stood for the citizens, the good people of North Yorkshire. I agree about knee-jerk legislation. I remember the Dangerous Dogs Act that I think had to be repealed in the wake of some attacks by staffies. Yes, we don't want to rush into this. But I think, you know, your emails my emails aren't worth reading. What worries me about this constant surveillance is that it's a bit like CCTV. Who's actually going to review all the emails? Who's going to look at the footage? I'm much more interested in that figure that there were 22,000 calls to community hotlines. What we need in this country is not the war on terror and talk about that, but have an army of citizen policemen who report everything back to the authorities if they... So we just keep our eyes and ears open as we go about our business.
That's the Stasi.
No, it's not, Nick. But if you have some loner...
with you, Rachel.
Wait, Rachel,
You nearly said lunatic.
No, what I'm saying is everybody's got to go about their business with their eyes open, and the police need our help because we don't want it to be all about the police. We're all in charge.
I think Nick hasn't come in.
Go on, Nick. What do you mean? What's wrong?
What's wrong
with ringing
Nick hasn't come in yet, and I think he needs to.
And then can I say one thing?
He's looking very confused.
I've never seen such shock as we saw on the face of Afua.
Why can't citizens be alert? That's all I'm saying.
Describe the difference between that and effectively almost like a Stasi-like force.
Completely misunderstanding.
We should celebrate the fact, as Carol's just told us, that the number of calls to this anti-terror hotline has increased. We should be absolutely aware and absolutely sorry. This man doesn't represent Muslims. It's a very narrow... No. So again, and we've been in accord for most of this today's show. But that, I have to file under knee-jerk reaction. We need a civilian police force.
I wonder if Rachel maybe didn't mean to make it sound like she wanted everyone to start spying on you.